Hi, how are you? My name's Hilary Walton, and this is the Digital Culture Ideas Show. This is the show where we discuss how the internet and technology has significantly changed the way we think, interact, behave, and communicate. In short, this is a show about technology and people. And sometimes it's so much more than that. If you're enjoying the show, please make sure you subscribe, and I would love for you to leave me a review. Also, perhaps look into following me on one of the professional groups that we have on LinkedIn or Facebook, and that's Digital Culture Ideas or the New Zealand Digital Leaders Network. On today's show, I want to welcome Chris Hales. Chris is a cybersecurity professional with the NZTA, the New Zealand Transport Agency. Now, it's not every day that you meet the male counterpart of yourself, the male version of yourself, but I kind of feel like today was a little bit like that for me. So Chris started his career as a qualified journalist. I started my career as an organizational psychologist. Chris worked for the GCSB. I worked for the MI5 in London. Chris researches and has done a lot of work in the area of human factor and security. I've done a lot of work and research in the area of safety culture. Chris is online in terms of social media. He writes lots of blogs and articles that you can see up on LinkedIn. I do a lot of social media as well. I really enjoyed this conversation with Chris. I am still trying to convince him to start a podcast and a YouTube channel. But other than that, I feel really akin to him, and I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. He is a fantastic storyteller. He has these amazing analogies that he pulls out, which just bring the kind of content alive. I think you'll notice that during the show today as well. And we go through human factor and security and safety culture and security culture and how they're very similar but different. We talk about how you measure someone's security kind of risk profile, perhaps using a security quotient. And we discuss a whole bunch of stuff, and I could have talked to him nonstop on and on. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to the male me. Just kidding. He's more than that. I'd like to introduce you to Chris Hales. Chris, how are you?
I'm great, Hilary. Thank you.
Look, this is a little bit odd because we haven't actually met in person. I've quite literally been probably admiring you from afar. Your name was given to me as someone to kind of watch and follow and look out for because you're right up my alley in terms of security culture and security behaviors and mindset. And there's certainly a lot of synergies, I think, between our backgrounds, which is really interesting, particularly with the work you're doing, developing the security quotient. And then, I think of the work I was doing, measuring security culture. And so I guess to start, I wanted to ask you why. So why are you interested in it, and what's been your origin story to kind of get here?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? Origin story. I feel like I'm in one of those Marvel movies. No,
you totally are.
yeah. I mean, I guess it's interesting. I started out as a journalist. Actually, I qualified and worked as a journalist originally, trolling around the courts in a town called Brighton in the UK, writing really salacious stories, and found that I didn't really enjoy it actually. And managed to get a job working for the Daily Mirror newspaper up in London, who, strangely, this is going back 25 years ago, said, "Does anybody know about the internet, and can anybody build things on the internet?" And I put my hand up and I was like, "I know about the internet," thinking, I don't know that much, but I'm sure it won't be that hard. And I got into developing websites back in the day and found that I enjoyed building stuff, and fell into kind of an IT job. Rather than pure journalism. And then it's just kind of been a process of evolution since then, really. So I ended up working as a project manager for a long time, big London organizations. And then when I got to New Zealand about 11 years ago, you get here and you think, oh, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to open like a yoga cafe or something like that. I'm going to become a farmer, and you quickly realize that that you grew up in a city and you know nothing about fields or animals. and secondly, that you know nothing about yoga either. So I fell into an IT job. I was working for NetSafe for many years, and just really was at the blunt end of digital harm, I guess. You know, a lot of time spent answering the phone to people who were at the bottom of a cliff, and that just kind of led me into kind of an interest on, I guess, harm reduction. You know, security is obviously, it's quite sort of engineering heavy, but the people side of it for me was more of interest. You know, how did people end up in this position? Where did they get to? You know, which controls failed to find them there? So that's kind of my origin story, I guess.
That's so interesting. And when I read that you're a journalist as well, I was like, oh, that's brilliant, because so much of security is communication and writing and, you know, so actually that probably set you in a really good stead for communicating some of the awesome work you're doing. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I guess it's, I mean, it's really interesting because I often get, you know, sat in a room of security people and they always point to you and go, well, you're not technical. So, and I think, well, I am, you know, kind of technical. I've built systems and I've, you know, created things and I've put them on the internet and I've tested them and pen tested them and remediated the code, and, you know, I can develop and stuff. But yeah, I guess at the end of the day, I like to talk about the problem. If that's a terrible thing to say, is communicating the reason why we're here. I think, you know, security for me is, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's a grudge purchase for a lot of people. It's not really something that's on their radar. It's not mandated. It's not, you know, a compliance action for a lot of New Zealand organisations. We're very light touch, and so if you can try and tell people about, you know, the reason why they should invest, the reason why they should take the time, the reason why they should bake security in at the beginning, yeah, maybe that helps us all achieve a better place. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it just sort of another thought I've had, just based on what you're saying, is I think in the technology industry, we probably do need to get over ourselves a bit, and that technology is just for techie people or just for IT people, because there's so many other jobs, management, sales, HR, like it's permeating everything, every career, every role, every industry. And I think sometimes seeing IT or technology as only for, you're on the in crowd if you've got an IT background or whatever, I think is really out of date. That's what I'm going to say on that.
Yeah.
That's my new thought on it.
I definitely agree. I mean, I was just reading the news this morning, and there was a story about Tim Shadbolt, the mayor of Invercargill, complaining that he couldn't now take part in the council meetings because no one had given him some IT training. And I read the story and I thought, actually, that's like a little microcosm of what we're kind of facing in the real world. Is you've got a well-intentioned user, you've got the mayor of the council who's desperately trying to keep up with technology and stay abreast of all of the, you know, whether it's Teams this week or Zoom or whatever it is, or however we've been working over the lockdown. And here's a man who's desperately saying, you know, please, could somebody train me? Could you just tell me how this works and what I need to do? And I think yeah, we often assume that everyone has vast abilities and knowledge, and that we're all, you know, ready to just pick up the next thing and run with it. So yeah, telling people the why and the how, I think, is really, really key.
Definitely, yeah. So one of the other commonalities I've sort of noticed between us is that we tend to take on quite a lot of additional work or personal work, or you know, we've got passion projects on the go, you know, because alongside your day job managing cyber at the New Zealand Transport Agency, so you're a security researcher, cybersecurity researcher, and you've got this whole program of work going on there. You also chair and manage the Auckland chapter of ISACA. And you're extremely active on, you know, social media and write a number of articles and things like that. I still want to encourage you into podcasts and YouTube channel, but that aside, I think, you know, from one really busy kind of multifaceted person to another, I think it'd be really interesting for the audience to sort of understand, you know, how do you do so much, and what's your mindset in terms of what you take on?
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I was thinking about this before, and I've run businesses on the side for over 20 years. So I remember when I got into building websites, I started developing sites outside of work because I enjoyed doing it, and it was a skill that was, you know, you could trade and you could get money for. So I had a web development business in the UK for about 15 years. I have a Lego business here, which, you know, my wife and I run, and we've done shopping mall events, we've done, you know, corporate training days and stuff like that. I think, if I'm honest, the day job is constraining. You know, you operate within a large organization, and things take a long time. You have to play a long game. And I think for me, doing the other stuff is kind of like a blow-off valve. You know, you get to be creative over here. You've got things within your control. Often, you know, I'll dial into a meeting where there might be like 25 people, and it's, you know, it's that committees type scenario where you have to nudge things along. It might take 3 months, 6 months, 9 months to get to the end destination. And the side gig, for me, is just something that you can actively control and actually deliver on. So I just enjoy it. You know, for me, it's like, it's not really work. I think if you have a passion for things, you just like it. And I think, you know, we talked before, you know, having kids, I think you develop less need for sleep. And you just get used to getting more stuff done.
Structure, you don't need that.
Just see how the day goes and run with it, really.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I totally think that's the secret ingredient as well. If you're really enjoying what you're doing, doesn't actually feel like work. I mean, don't tell my day job this, but I'd probably work for free for them because I enjoy working for them so much. My husband would kill me if I actually did that. But do you know what I mean? It's it is important to do what you love.
I mean, I think for me, it's if you find something that you have an interest in, a genuine enthusiasm for, it's not work. You know, you get up and every day you turn up and you do something because you think you're making the world a better place. I'm not suggesting I'm curing cancer or anything like that, but you enjoy, if you're mentally engaged and you're using your brain and you're seeing outcomes, I think that to me is important. And what tends to happen, I don't know how you feel, Hilary, but I find the more things you do, the more things you get asked to do. It kind of snowballs. You know, people come to you and go, well, you seem to have done that, so could you do one of these? And sometimes it's terrible, but you just don't say no, do you? You think, oh, that sounds fun, I'll go and do a bit of that as well. Yeah.
And also there is something about saying yes to opportunities which creates more opportunities as well. So while and work is always up and down in terms of peaks and troughs, you know, busy, not so busy. Hopefully. So hopefully it's got troughs. So I'm kind of like, well, I can get through this next bit and then I'll be fine, and then we'll go to the next. So with the work that you've done and put out on social media, so there must have been some point where you made this kind of decision that you were going to be on those platforms and put your work out there. And from my perspective, like, that was very much a choice of, I was working in digital transformation, and I was like, I can't be this digital leader and not develop some digital behaviors and be on these, you know, digital platforms and kind of find out more about what digital culture is and what that means to kind of embed that in different people. So why did you make that? What kind of caused you to make that decision, and how has that gone for you?
Oh, another good question. I mean, I guess I got on Facebook about 2007 when I was back in London, and at the time I was managing a team who were much younger than I was. I was much younger then myself, but I joined in because everybody else was on Facebook, and it seemed like the thing to do. I'll get on here and understand the new platform. I don't use Facebook anymore, I should say, but that's another decision. But yeah, I mean, to me, I guess part of it was the role at NetSafe. We were required to understand platforms and technologies that were coming in. You know, what things were floating in from the left, and all of a sudden there were problems on there, and you had to understand that platform. You know, I remember signing up for a dating app, and at the time sort of saying to my wife, look, I'm really sorry, but I have to sign up for this app because it's going to give you a message and say your husband just joined. And it wasn't the mainstream ones. It was,
and your friends are going to be like, I just saw him.
And I remember saying to her, look, I'm really sorry, but I have to understand how this works and how you report things, and, you know, and how the connections are made. And I remember she just looked at me and she's like, what are you talking about? This is rubbish. But yeah, I mean, you know, that understanding the technology, like you say, you have to, if you want to call yourself, you know, a digital leader, I guess you have to understand what the cool kids are using, don't you, to dumb it down a bit. But yeah, for me, I use Twitter a lot. I sort of lurk there. For me, that's a really fascinating way to kind of see news. like having worked as a journalist on newspapers and magazines, Twitter to me with that citizen journalism thing is fascinating. You've got reporting real time from all around the world at the touch of an app, and you can just see a whole series of different viewpoints from the old kind of top-down control model of broadcasting and publishing. I think when I trained as a journalist, it took me 12 months, legal, shorthand, all of these kind of old school methods. And I can do 120 word per minute shorthand. I can't read it back anymore, but that's another thing. But the editor was in charge, and the editor set the tone, and the publication was refined through very tight guidelines. And now, of course, these platforms are huge, and you can just see information from people all over the world. And I think that's a beautiful thing in a way. That obviously has some downsides, but you can access experts from anywhere in the world on very tight topics, really.
Yes, yeah, because the character limit is so short, it has to be so tight. But then you can get more information if you need. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm on Twitter as well. I'm semi-active on there, not massively. I joined it like ages ago and kind of did nothing, and now I'm a little bit of a voyeur because it's quite can be like you get a lot of back chat, or like people can be nice and people can not be nice. Compared to Facebook, which is generally okay, depending on how you're using it. LinkedIn tends to be quite nice. We're quite polite and professional on LinkedIn, and we support each other generally. And then Insta's very supportive, Instagram, and then TikTok is just like fun, and you can put on whatever, and it's very supportive of, new ways of doing things. And that's probably actually the age of the platforms as well. The older a platform gets, the more frank and in your face it can be. So yeah, it's interesting playing around with the different platforms for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of effort on LinkedIn. I try and post something up there every day, even on the weekends. And people always say to me, "Well, do you ever do any work?" And I'm like, "Well, of course I do work, but I think for me, I like to read a lot, and I like to kind of digest, whether it's on other people's, tweets or, stuff that people put up through emails or news groups even, and stuff like that. And you digest it, and it builds a world picture. And then I like to share stuff, because at the end of the day, if you're not initiating a conversation, maybe those topics never get talked about. And we had a great panel session a couple of weeks back with the chapter that we run in Auckland, where we talked about future threats, and that to me was the outcome of reading a lot of stuff and having those conversations on a platform like LinkedIn, and then inviting some panelists to come along and give their viewpoints. And I just think if you don't have those conversations, well, are they ever going to be said?
Yes,
it's low effort, isn't it? You can initiate these things. You don't have to have a printing press, and you don't have to have a network of vans to distribute your ideas. You can start those conversations and get other people engaged, and that to me is part of the joys of online, I suppose.
Absolutely. And Twitter is definitely great for cyber. Like you say, it's got some key voices on there, and you can follow topics and threads and research really quickly, which is good. Speaking of research, I love that you are researching the human element in security. Can you give our listeners a bit of a brief on what this research is about, if they haven't come across your work before?
Yeah, sure. Oh dear, where do we begin? So I guess the foundation of it is around the harm reduction that I talked about before. So when I was at NetSafe, I built a platform called the Orb, where we had over 6 years, we had about 30,000 incidents and about $35 million in losses, financial losses. So fraud, cyber attacks, ransomware, that kind of thing. And for me, not only reading the reports through the platform, but talking to people on the phone, it quickly became evident that there must be patterns in why people became victims. There must be behavioural reasons why somebody ended up at the bottom of the cliff and on the phone to me crying about X, Y, and Z. Whatever it was, I used to sit there and think, if only we could get to the root cause, maybe we could actually address it. NetSafe was really interesting because effectively there were very few fences at the top of the cliff, and people plunged over, and then they would seek help via the usual channels like the police, and basically get redirected through to us. And you know, a third of our calls and reports would come from New Zealand Police at the time. And I just used to think, well, crime prevention is, you know, a standard way of operating. You know, you think about the messaging we give to people about burgling and car crime, you know, don't leave objects on the seats, you know, have lights outside your house, and, you know, and those kind of things, crime prevention. Why don't we do something prevention wise in the human aspect? And I got reading about it, and I went from NetSafe and I went and joined National Cybersecurity Centre, which is obviously part of GCSB. And what surprised me was the incidents were caused by the same reasons. You know, you're dealing with individuals, and then you're dealing with large organizations where an advanced persistent threat might be the actor. But the reason was the same. It was an end user clicked on a phishing email or went to a website or gave away some personal information, XYZ. And so I did some digging, and I found a piece of research by a guy called Eli Burstein at Google. And he had done some work with a university in the US where he'd left a load of USB sticks scattered around, and 300 of them, and people started plugging them in. And when they plugged them in, one, it would fire back to his machine, you know, like a standard pen testing report that somebody had put it into a machine, you know, call home. And then it would launch a survey, and people were asked, you know, you've plugged in this USB stick, that's a dangerous security behavior, why? And the research came back and it said, you know, biggest reason was curiosity. I want to know what's on the drive. There was somebody said, you know, if you stuck a label on them saying Bitcoins, you know, everyone would have gone, oh, I'm going to get really rich. But, you know, and also, you know, the second reason was to help people. Most people were looking for files, for identifying files on the USB drive so that they could find the student and give it back on the basis that the information might be of value. And I read this, and the report went on, and it said what they found was a trait was people who enjoyed high risk sports were most likely to plug them in. Right. And it's a student group, and they said people that go bungee jumping and whitewater rafting and stuff like that. And I thought, well, that's bloody obvious, isn't it? Let's be honest. You know, if you like risk, you probably do risky things. But you dig into it, and I did a lot of research, and I found some commonalities with health prevention. So in the health sector, we try and target resources at people who are most in need. You know, if there's the ability to save somebody having a leg amputated because they have a bad diet and they have a bad lifestyle, you know, those, I guess, comorbidities for amputation because they have diabetes or whatever. The health environment says, let's focus our effort, our prevention effort, our early interventions on the people most in need. And so I thought there must be something we could do. And that's what fired me up, really. So I applied for some funding to InternetNZ. They very kindly gave me a grant. And that's kind of been my passion project for the last 3 years. I've done 3 stages of surveying, got some data back, came up with some potential hypotheses and some findings, and then just tried to progress it from there, really.
Wow. That's awesome. And I love the comparison with crime prevention as well. That's a really useful model. I know when I was looking at security culture, I was looking a lot to health and safety, safety culture, because same kind of thing, like there'd been a lot of work done on that. It was quite a mature area. You know, people understood, you know, what that looked like. Even, you know, thinking about car crash prevention and anti-kind of drunk driving and things like all of that had already been done. So on the security side, there's a lot of reference points. I mean, there's some differences as well that you need to consider, but there's a lot of, you know, work that has been done. So that sounds awesome. And that's interesting. It's interesting what you say about certain people being more susceptible, if you like, to click on things or stick USB sticks in when they shouldn't. So my colleague at Aura, Peter Bailey, he let me know about some research. It's not great research, but in 2019, apparently New Zealand topped the list as a country for the most defrauded and scammed country in the world. In the world, not the kind of list you really want to be at the top of, unfortunately. But does that ring true with perhaps what you're seeing coming out of your research or talking to colleagues? Why do you think that might be?
That's a loaded question, isn't it? I'm really conscious. I've lived here a fair chunk of time now. I hold a New Zealand passport, so I don't want to kind of be the interloping British man with a Kiwi passport saying, "Oh, you're all terrible." No, I mean, I go back to I tell a story. When I used to do presentations at NetSafe, I used to talk about that national culture. And I think it's a beautiful thing, don't get me wrong. Kiwis are some of the most friendliest people in the world. I remember I was working in London, partly why we ended up down here. I sat next to a Kiwi at the Financial Times for 4 years. He used to go, New Zealand, New Zealand, New Zealand.
Yes,
and that's
we do.
And I think he just lives up the road from me. And I said, are you sure you weren't on commission from immigration? And he laughs. But, there's a certain personality, I think, that people are very friendly, they're very welcoming. Anywhere you go in the world and you bump into a Kiwi, they're outgoing, they're very nice people. That's a generalization, but I think in my 11 years of living here, I've only had one really terrible experience with a very stressed out lady. But most of the time you will bump into people. Like I can get on an Air New Zealand flight down to Wellington, haven't been for a while, and I even know 10 people on the plane now, and everyone's friendly and they're welcoming. And so there's a story I used to tell. 3 days after we got here, we went to try and buy a car, and we found a car that we liked, and we're in a garage. We've been there for 10 minutes, and I thought, I like that car, let's buy the car. And the money that we were bringing over from the UK hadn't turned up, and the guy in the garage said, "Oh, don't worry, take the car, come back next week and pay me the money." And I remember standing there, and I looked at my wife and I was like, "Is this guy mad? He's known me for like 10 minutes." And he said, "Oh, you seem like a nice guy. Bring the $10,000 back for the car next week when it's arrived." And I remember thinking, what kind of country is this? This is he'd obviously made a decision, and he built that sense of trust around me, which I think is a wonderful thing. I'm a trustworthy person. But no, I mean, I think maybe at the national level, that tyranny of distance piece, a lot of people have grown up in an environment where it's that 2 degrees thing. Everybody knows each other, reputations are formed, there's trust face to face and that kind of thing. And maybe that is being exploited by outsiders, by overseas cyber criminals. Maybe people are ploughing a fertile field. If I'm honest, there's probably also another part to it. When I was working at NetSafe, what I found was a lot of people were financially quite vulnerable. And I think that probably stood out to me at the time as well. And I think we've seen that recently. If you've seen the research, the after effects of the COVID lockdown, there's a lot of people who are probably, 1 or 2 pay packets away from a fairly risky situation. I think that reflects, small market, small population, that kind of thing. And I think people, if I'm honest, that there's the trust element, but there's also that vulnerability to exploitation. I think, I've got a good friend, Bronwyn Groot, who works for the Commission for Financial Capability. She does a lot of work in the scam space. And she will often say, anyone can be scammed based on the context and the situation. And I think maybe a lot of us are financially vulnerable, and that probably leads to it as well.
Yes. Yeah. And we do have a habit of leaving our houses open and windows open, and we don't close up, and hey, the neighbors will look out for us and things like that as well. And it's such a lovely attribute of the nation, as you say, but just in the cyber context, it's not as great.
I think that research, if I'm thinking of the right one, I think it's probably the Microsoft research around the PC doctors. So the people that would ring you up and say, "There's a virus on your computer. You need to let me in and have remote access." I think that's where that research comes from, because I did a little bit of digging, and I remember it came out and it upset a few people. And I remember thinking, "Oh, that's a difficult story to write, and a difficult sort of problem to tell people, isn't it?" And I remember we used to regularly deal with people who had given remote access to their computer, who had received those the call center calls saying, hello, I'm from Microsoft, let me in, you've got a virus. And it did surprise me. We had thousands of those calls, and 1 in 5 people would actually give remote access, and 1 in 10 would actually pay them money as well. And that to me was quite a significant volume. You think that, take it on trust that some random person claiming to be from Microsoft is calling you. It's late at night or funny time of day, and it's a really difficult one, isn't it? I think how you harden people up, harden that population up without losing some of that beautiful friendliness is a tough one, really.
Absolutely. And sort of talking about trying to measure these risk factors in people, or trying to get an idea of how secure someone might be. You have been developing what you call a security quotient. Is that the SQ? Kind of like EQ and IQ. Love it, by the way. Well, that sounds completely useful. Like, there's a lot of use cases for that. Top of mind for you, what are some of the ways that could be used? Measuring people for a security quotient. What could that be used for?
Well, I mean, I guess the idea came to me. I had you were talking about health and safety before, so I've got a good mate who works at Air New Zealand, and he was talking. I was telling him about my thinking that there must be a percentage of people that we could identify and help. We could educate them better, or we could give them role-based training, or we could give them adaptive controls and those kind of things. And he was telling me about Hogan assessments. And he said, we're a high reliability organization. We have things that go boom, planes and things like that. So we do a lot of psychological testing. We have assessments over people's suitability for roles. They're imagine you're the captain of an airliner and you've got 300 souls behind you. We want to know that you are, mentally, psychologically well, and you're not one of those people who drives badly on the road. I was going to swear then, but I won't. And so he talked to me about this, and I did some research, and I thought, this is fascinating. I got inducted into GCSB. I went through all the background checks there. Yes. They shone lights in my face and pulled my feet and think, no, I won't go. I talked to the organizational psychologist there, and I had a conversation with him, and I said, there must be signs that you look for in terms of security clearances, these red flags. And he said, yeah, definitely. And we talked about some of that. And to me, I thought, well, we talk about vulnerabilities in security. We run Qualys over our internet-facing systems. We look for boxes over here that are unpatched. Well, imagine if we took that model and we said, well, what about our people? Maybe some of our people are unpatched. They need an upgrade or something like that. And so I kind of thought about it. Well, maybe we could find a way to scan the human population. Scan the end users in the same way we do our hardware and our software, and that security quotient. I thought, well, I could develop something and become incredibly rich, and also save people and help. Yes, I mean at the time I was thinking, there must be something in it. So the model works on psychometric scales. I mean, obviously with your background, I'm guessing you're well familiar with the concept.
Yes, I've had my fair share of psychometric tests and report writing, and definitely.
Yeah. So the concept works on a series of scales. We ask you 62 questions based on some lifestyle factors, some weightings and that kind of thing. I have a model now which notionally will identify very high risk individuals. The 3 tranches of surveys that I've done and the data I've had back to date would suggest that there are significant correlations between the way that you live, your knowledge, your approach to life in terms of being future focused. That concept with health prevention of, do you go to the gym? Do you go, take care of yourself? Do you eat a healthy diet? Those kind of things. There's definitely correlations between them. I can't say that it's causation, but I think the data so far has really hinted at common kind of problems to address. And I gave a presentation on this a while back, and I said, if I was going to try and do something to save people from cybercrime, I would probably open a gym where, when you're on the exercise bike, we play you videos of cyber training, and we also give you nicotine patches. And you have to,
so that you come back
hear me out. Yeah, no. It wasn't habit making. Sorry, I should make it clear. It was One of the standouts was smokers. So I smoked for 15 years. I think I can talk about smoking being a bad thing. Smoking, obviously, the Ministry of Health declares it as a high-risk behaviour. If you're a smoker, you're taking risks above and beyond. You know, we know now, we're well proven that habit is harmful. And so the research found actually that smokers were 2.5 times more likely to have already been a victim of cybercrime. And a lot of people said to me, well, that's bloody obvious. And I said, well, is it? I don't know. And a lot of people who didn't exercise, you know, the people who were less likely to have suffered malware, credential loss, you know, cyber incidents, you know, things like that, had fallen victim to frauds. Those people spent less time exercising. And I thought, well, this is fascinating. If we could get people in a gym and we could give them little training videos and I could give presentations, you know, it could be like the Les Mills of cyber. And that's kind of where I've got to be honest. It's you know, for me, it's a passion project. It's helping people not end up at the bottom of the cliff, and that's the kind of pitch, really. Yeah.
Well, I've thought of a use case for you as well, actually, which I was going to talk to you about after this, but I might as well talk to you about it now. So part of what New Zealand's doing at the moment is it's going through this Vision Week NZ. You may have heard about it. There's lots of presentations and interviews and, you know, things like that going on, and it's about post-pandemic, you know, re-envisioning and resetting. What do we need this new New Zealand to look like to, you know, get us going, advance the economy? There's, you know, 20 million that the government has kind of unaccounted for, and, you know, what are some of the ideas from the people? What are the visions from the people to move that forward? And so I'm actually speaking at this webinar tonight. I'm totally going to talk about you, actually. Because I think, you know, if we think about all the people that might be perhaps losing their jobs or you know, to come in the future, a lot of people out of work. Tech is one of the biggest, fastest growing industries. You know, year on year, we develop more and more jobs. Tech is also not just for the technical anymore. It's because it's going to be part of every career. It's going to be everywhere. So I think there's probably a way to combine tech training, so getting people into more technology subjects, with, because one of the reasons people don't get into tech is they don't trust it, they're afraid, and maybe this whole security quotient idea can be something that's kind of factored in as part of the training. So getting people into tech, getting them to trust tech by doing this kind of, you know, human firewall training, you know, which you kind of talked about, and then also adding a splash of adaptability training, which it sounds like your security quotient may have a bit of in there anyway, but getting people to think with a growth mindset, you know, I can learn this, I don't know it now, but I will develop, and, you know, getting them to be not afraid of getting into technology. So that's going to be my kind of piece of Vision Week, including some of your work, but I'll reference you, don't you worry.
Oh, thank you. No, I mean,
but
sounds
I
great,
think that would be amazing use of your research combined with technology and things like that. So
yeah, I mean the key finding really was there was a gap between, you know, you do the research, you pull out the key points, and there was a 10% knowledge gap between people who've been victims of cybercrime already and those who weren't. You know, the victors and the victims, I called them, and I think, to me, it's fascinating. You know, we all use this technology, but many of us have never received any training, any formalized training in any of it, really. You know, we're kind of fumbling around, you know, making the best of it. And consumer technology, obviously, the iPad and apps environments and all the rest of it has made it very easy for most of us to pick this stuff up. But when I think back to my parents or anybody, you know, even my kids themselves, you know, nobody's ever had that structured guidance. I think, you know, my son at the moment, he's just gone through the process of getting a driving license. And obviously I work in a transport sector. We put a lot of effort into training people around the risks of driving, and we shape them and we put them through a training path. I don't think anyone I know has ever gone through any formal technology training. And it would be great, wouldn't it, if we could upskill the country, you know, to really get that swell of effort and knowledge, you know, get people into those
some great analogies. Some great analogies are the things that make you go, yes. well, no, we're doing it over here. We should do it over here.
I mean, it's, to me, it's really interesting. You know, I took the role at NZTA because transport to me is a really interesting piece. You know, we have automation, we have electrification, we have all these kind of mobility as a service models where people won't need to own vehicles anymore. They can just ride share or hail something and stuff like that. And I look at you mentioned it before, Hilary, about the concept of road safety. You know, when I did the National Awareness Programme back in 2012, 2013, I did a lot of research into road safety, and road safety talks about the 3 E's, you know, engineering, enforcement, and education. That's how we keep a safe road system. And that to me is what technology should be about as well. You know, engineering, better product engineering, better design engineering, that kind of thing. Enforcement in terms of, security by design, exactly, better enforcement. So we have very little regulation over some of these enormous companies, and they do operate with greater powers than kingdoms, you know, and countries and stuff like that, which is fascinating in its own right. And then education, you know, if we can drive people into a career that pays well, can be done from anywhere in the world, I just think it's a great win, really.
Absolutely, that's awesome. And so, sort of taking that analogy, then, you know, you often speak around, you know, valuing people as a core component of an effective system, and that, you know, people are the really important part to work on. They're also the hardest part, though, because, you know, sometimes you say your messages over and again and they kind of don't stick. What do you suggest as a different way to message people so that, you know, people and business leaders and organizations do really get it?
I mean, it's a hard one, isn't it? I mean, I think for me, calling people the weakest link is easy. It's a throwaway comment. You know, it's. I remember when I was, you know, we used to deal a lot with people who had lost money. You know, anywhere up to $2 million through cybercrime. You know, lots of individuals who found themselves at the bottom of the cliff, and there was a lot of victim blaming went on. Back in the day, there was a lot of talk of, you know, oh, it's their fault, they fell for it, they were stupid. And I used to hate that kind of, you know, leaving it to the fact that somebody was weak at a point in time and got exploited. How do you address it? I mean, I've been into that security culture piece for a few years, and I think you have to tell people a story about why they should care. You have to get them to want to engage. There was a really good quote from a guy called Lance Spitzner. You probably know him. He runs the security awareness work within SANS. So he does all of the annual campaigns, and he does all of the training and all that kind of thing. And he talked about the fact that people know what they should be doing. We know how we should protect ourselves online. There was a great piece of research out of one of the Auckland universities recently where a professor had done a piece of work and said, we know that we should, you know, do these kind of things to protect our data, but we just don't, because it's too hard, or we can't be bothered, or we don't see the risk. There's an intangibility of risk, I guess. So you have to paint for people a picture. You have to communicate them why they should care, why they should be involved, and then draw out really simple steps for how to get there. You know, how to address that problem. I'm doing the security culture work at NZTA at the moment, and we found 8 key behaviours that we wanted to address, and we've really got a group of security champions together, and we're working through them in kind of a focus group kind of way to say, well, what would make you, 1, care, and 2, change that behaviour? You know, how is it a tool? Is it a process? Is it, you know, just a 5-minute conversation? It's a really hard one. That to me is a big piece of work yet to come, I guess.
Definitely. With that, did you find peer pressure came out as a big one in terms of security culture?
Sort of modelling the behaviour of others around you?
Yes, and them kind of keeping an eye on what you're doing. For example, one thing that some people have noticed is, so during lockdown, with people working from home, people have kind of gotten out of the habit of locking their computer because they're at home. Whereas in the office, like, you would completely do it all the time. You'd be super embarrassed if you didn't, in fact. And I think that's probably because you wouldn't want your peers seeing that you haven't locked your computer, as well as keeping it safe and wanting to as well. But so as we transition back into the office, Like there may be some behaviours that we need to kind of reinvigorate.
Yeah.
And maybe peer pressure is a mechanism that in an office does keep things going a certain way.
Definitely.
Makes sense.
I think if I go back to the road safety kind of side of things again, like we have a team of psychologists at the agency who do some amazing work about identifying risk factors in vehicle crashes. So we have vehicle data going back for decades, and there's commonalities, bad road design, people driving, old and unserviced vehicles. But there's also that normality of your peers. And I think the best model is probably the drink driving. You think of the Ghost Chips advert, that
Yes.
kind of messaging that we've had over the last decade about, utes upturned in the side of a ditch and, stop a mate from driving drunk, bloody legend, and all those kind of slogans.
Yeah.
All of that works at that kind of nudge behavior factors around make it normal and acceptable and, a good behavior to have if you stop the mate from driving drunk. Make it normalized so that people understand that they shouldn't have a couple of beers on a Friday afternoon and then go home. All of that messaging, I think, probably is targeted at a wider community, isn't it? Make it socially unacceptable to have a few beers and then go home. And then other people will become your protectors. We follow that kind of, I forget the term for it. There's a great piece of work by Professor Cialdini.
Is it the herd behaviour or something else?
It might be that. There's definitely a term for it where we model ourselves and other people. And I think if you can persuade people in an office, that locking devices is the norm and that's the way we work, it's much more likely that we'll look around us, like you say, and we'll see other people have locked, so we should lock too. And that reinforces that good behaviour, I guess.
Definitely, yeah. And so, we've sort of talked a little bit about it, but creating this idea of a human vulnerability scanner, like maybe through measuring this kind of security quotient, and then also having that human firewall in the shape of education. I mean, that would just be such a brilliant benefit for New Zealand and internet users worldwide. So is there a way that people can input into your research so that we can, have a look at going further down the track with some of those great ideas you've got? Or how can people input?
I mean, I'd love to get more people involved. If I'm honest, it's been a struggle. It kind of sits in this, it's been told to me, as cyber psychology. And there's not been much interest from a pure security perspective, because people sort of look at it and go, this seems a bit vague and woolly. It's not a firewall. I can't put access control lists in and stuff like that. And define rules. I would love it if somebody would reach out and say, we've already built this system and it does X, or we could use this tool. I was talking to Craig at Darktrace recently, and he was saying, their technology already builds these kind of pictures of people. I'm sure that user behavior stuff is now part of many other suites of security tools as well. If there's people that out there with the research backgrounds that have a far better, grasp of statistics and regression and all of that jazz, which I've been fumbling through, I'd love to hear from them. I am having a conversation with a university over in Australia at the moment. It turned out that there was another team doing something similar over in Sydney, which I stumbled across this year. There's also another team doing something similar in Cambridge University in the UK. So I would love, to see this come to fruition. If we could get, a simple model in place and a scanner built, even if it's just a minimum viable proposition, and you can experiment with a group of employees. If there's a large employer out there that's happy to run that kind of a test and look at people, it would be fantastic. I'd really welcome anyone reaching out.
Excellent. Well, certainly let me know how I can help further any of your research, because I just think it would be really fantastic to have that tool in place, and then kind of working on the different parts of the people to strengthen them up and build them up in terms of security.
Yeah.
And so how can people best contact you or find out more about your work? Where's a good place for them to look?
I'm quite active on LinkedIn. I think most people I know strongly believe that I don't do anything other than LinkedIn. That's not true. It's a vicious rumor. So yeah, reach out to me on there. I have my website, Ubisec. there's many ways that you can find me. I'm in Auckland. I tend to go to ISIG, ISACA, ISC Squared, ISF, all of those groups. Just look me up and give me a shout, and
awesome.
be happy.
So you mentioned your website. Do you want to spell that out for people as well, just in case they didn't catch it?
So I came up with the term ubiquitous security. So we have ubiquitous connectivity, 5G and all the rest of it. We're always online. It's an idea for a business in the future. ubisec.nz is the website.
Awesome. And I have been on that website, and it is really, it's got some really good information around your research and what you're trying to do there. So definitely a good place to look.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ellen.
Oh, well, Chris, this has been really fun. I knew there was synergies between us, but I feel I could just kind of sit here and chat to you kind of all kind of morning and afternoon, actually. But we probably do have to come to an end. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. You've got some great stories, some great analogies, and I think that, what you're doing will be so useful for people. And if it's okay with you, I am going to take that Vision Week idea into the webinar tonight. And,
for sure. Yeah.
And see if we can get some more funding for you from government to complete the vulnerability scanner and the firewall as well.
That would be great.
Awesome.
Yeah. Great stuff. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, take care. Enjoy the rest of your day. See you.
See you.